afternoon, everyone. This is Smita, your Community Life Services Director, and it's my pleasure today to spend some time with Peggy Harris. Many of you know Peggy. She lives in Gables East, a wonderful, wonderful resident. She has led several lectures for us, highly intellectual, and you guys have all watched in the past week the Seriously Silly Singers concert, and Peggy is the director of this group. So welcome, Peggy.
Thank you.
So Peggy, let's start off a little bit about your concert. You did a phenomenal job with this concert, Seriously Silly. Singers, and the way you guys were dressed and your thoughts and just everything about it was really delightful. So I think you worked really very hard, right?
It was fun. They did. They worked really hard. I thought it was going to be a simple concert because it was rounds and partner songs that everybody would know. But then it ended up being a lot of mental gymnastics to sing two different parts at the same time, to divide them into 2, 3, and 4 parts, and then to switch first from singing one part to another part. It ended up being more complicated than I wanted it to be, but we had an awful lot of fun, and the singers were just absolutely great.
Right. And I know it was challenging because when I watched it, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's really much more challenging than what I thought it was going to be. But you guys did a great job.
We did.
Y'all pulled through very well.
And we were really happy to find Denny Ausman to be our accompanist, and he just joined right in with having fun. So we incorporated him as soon as we discovered he was fun-loving. We incorporated him in it all.
So, just this whole project, the Seriously Silly Singers concert, I know you said you dreamt about it, you put your everything in it, and you got it to life, right?
Yep.
So tell me a little bit more about it. When did you start thinking, and how did you come up with this? Because it was complex, and even to dream about something like this is...
Well, I wanted to do a couple of things. First of all, we were really limited in what we could do with singers with COVID. So when we talked about can we do anything, and we did the Charles Dickens Singers at Christmas, and we had that limited number of people. So we were told you can have a maximum of 12 people.
Right.
And so what I really wanted to do was to focus on the singers and give them all a chance to do as much as they wanted to be able to do.
Right.
So we looked at the strongest singers who could carry parts. I wanted to get rid of the music stands. I wanted to get rid of the 3-ring notebooks because faces are buried in notebooks and you can't see faces.
Right.
And my ultimate dream was to put everything on an iPad, and we didn't get that far except for Bob Morden. He figured out how to do that. So that's the next generation of what we want to do. But what I wanted to do with the program was that recognizing that we've all been through a really, really difficult time.
Right.
There have been a lot of losses that we haven't really been able to process. And I thought people needed to be given permission to laugh. So then I started thinking about what could I do that was fun and that was silly. And that just kind of came to me. And then I just started researching rounds and partner songs, and you bought a few books to get it started, and I spent a lot of time on the internet looking for things. Then I had to transpose the music, and then I had to take parts off of records. So it was a very creative kind of a thing. And then I also wanted the singers to be a real part of determining what they did and how they did it.
So how long did y'all take? How many months or weeks?
Well, I worked on it for quite a while before, and then I think we had 10 to 12 rehearsals. So let's say over a 12-week period, the singers rehearsed.
Right.
And as I say, I put in quite a few hours before that, getting all the music organized.
I had an opportunity to watch one of your rehearsals, and I know how much of hard work everyone put in as they worked towards your vision.
Said they laughed, and that was that was the purpose. Give them permission to smile and to laugh and to do that. But then the closing two songs were more reflective, because I think people also need a chance to be able to reflect. It's been hard, and it's not easier now. It's still going to be that way. So I think with music we can do that, because people like to sing. And sometimes they say when you sing, you pray twice. So it worked from that. Yeah.
So Peggy, how long have you lived here at Southport Square?
About 5.5 years.
And you were involved in the Southport Square Singers previously for how long?
Yes, ever since I moved here.
Oh, really?
So I moved here in November, and in January I figured out how to say I'd like to sing.
Peggy, I remember the efforts that you had put in the Southport Square Singers concert behind the scenes. There was a lot of work that you had done, putting the binders together, making copies of the music, coming down and lugging everything to the town hall, as well as making space and being sure that the wheelchairs could pass through. That was a lot of work.
It was, yeah. We had, I think the maximum number we had was 26 singers, and we moved to the music stands. You got the music stands for us because I remember the first time Dolly Smith was the director, and the first time she asked me to direct, I got up there and the only thing I saw were all these gray hairs bending down over there. And I thought, I've never directed a group of gray hair before. And so that was when I realized, first of all, you can't sing if you're bending over. And secondly, you need to look at your audience and get your voices out. So we realized that the stands would probably be a much better fit for our group. And people are in walkers, people have visual issues. So we use music in a lot of ways. But
I think as we got out of COVID, your program just kept evolving, isn't it? And now you've come up with this brilliant idea.
Now we came up with this. It's just and it's a work in progress. I think figuring out. I have a little bit of music therapy in the back of my head. How can we use music to make a difference in people's lives? And people here love music. The concerts are well attended. They respond well to them. So figuring out different ways to introduce different music to them. When you think that the singers sang in 3 different languages, English, French, and Hebrew, as well as changing up all of the time signatures and saying we're going to have waltzing blind mice. And the first time I introduced that, you should have seen the look on their faces when we were doing it in what amounted to 3/8 time.
I thought it was novel and complex. And when we think about and talk about brain health, that they say that if you want to build those pathways in your brain, you really have to get yourself engaged or involved in something that is really novel and complex. And when I was watching the concert, that's what I was thinking of, that it was not just music which really supports the emotional dimension. You really enhance the intellectual dimension of your entire group.
Yeah, and I realized that for me it made a difference as I was working on it, and I was having to go back to music theory and use skills that I hadn't used for quite a while. The same with the chorus, is challenging them to do that, and they just stepped right up and did a fantastic job. So
they did.
We'll see what my dreaming comes. But what the creative approach is next.
Let's go back in time. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you come from originally?
Okay, well, originally, I was born in Hollywood, California.
okay.
I'm one of the few people I found that was born in Hollywood, California. My father was a doctor. He served in World War I.
Wow.
He was in three theaters there. I remember he was in Saint-Mihiel and Meuse-Argonne, and that was where he was gassed, and he earned his Purple Heart there.
Oh my.
Then he went to medical school, so he was a practicing OBGYN in Hollywood.
Wow.
Maintained active reserves. He retired. He went into the reserves as a sergeant, U.S. Army Medical Corps, and then he was activated in March of 1941, so 9 months before Pearl Harbor. He was called back to active duty, and he was not a spring chicken at that time when he was activated. And then he was sent overseas, and he was the commander of a base hospital behind the lines. So my mother, we had moved to Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is no place to live during the beginning of a world war. I can very dimly remember air raids, and the air raid warden with a little tin hat coming in, and we're hiding under the kitchen table, and all the blinds are drawn. And my mother said, "This is no place to be alone with 2 children." So the Army moved us to Missoula, Montana. And we spent several years in Missoula, Montana, and at that time it really could be described as a sleepy western town. And I absolutely loved it because I was a tomboy and I could just run all over the town and do things probably that my mother didn't want me to do. But we had a great time there, and then the war ended, and Dad had to decide whether or not he wanted to be return to an obstetrical practice and get up in the middle of the night and deliver babies, and he decided, no, I don't think so. And the Veterans Administration offered him a position, and we moved to Jefferson Barracks in Missouri. And so we lived on a military reservation. And I had some Native American friends who gave me a bad time about, oh, you live on the res too. So I did things like scaling the fence that divided us from the bluffs of the Mississippi River. And Jefferson Barracks is a very old military institution. And when we first moved there, the last of the cavalry horses were still running free. And again, being a tomboy, I could figure out how to get into all the empty buildings that were around with a couple of my little friends. And we did that. And there was a large chain link fence. And I would climb that chain link fence. And to me, it was 12 or 14 feet high. Now, it may not have been that high, but I could climb all the way down through the bluffs to the Mississippi River. And if my parents ever understood that I was there, I could have fallen in and disappeared, and nobody would have known what happened to me. But I found that there were little caves in the bluffs, and I'd take a book and a peanut butter sandwich and something with me and scale the fence and just sit there and watch Old Man River go by and watch the boats on it, and it was an absolutely delightful experience to live like that. Then my dad was transferred to Iowa City, and he became manager of the first VA hospital there. So I'm still living on federal property. I'm still living on a reservation, but it's not isolated. But there's still limitations as to what you can do. And it was kind of like my wings were clipped because there were no wild places that I could roam to, and I had to behave and find other things to do. So that was kind of that early growing up stage until I got married.
Wow. So what is your educational background?
So my educational background is music has always been a part of what I wanted to do. So I was majoring in music, very active in music, and somehow or other fell into percussion.
Wow.
So I ended up being the first woman to major in percussion at the University of Iowa. And it was a fairly new program, but it was a good, strong program. And originally I thought I would do concert band because, you know, percussion and bands kind of go together. But I fell in love with symphony orchestras. And that was what I really focused on being able to do. I was also studying voice and piano. So then of course you fall in love and you get married, and I hadn't finished school yet. But while I was in school, we would the band would go on tour, and we would have adventures. You know, the percussion section is always relegated to the very back of whatever group you're playing in.
Right.
And in Great Britain, the percussion section is known as the kitchen, because you have everything. Snares, traps, and other hunting devices are what was a piece written for me for one of my recitals. And believe it or not, we did percussion recitals because they were recital requirements. So I not only had to do percussion, but I had to do voice and piano recitals too.
Wow.
And I kept saying to myself, well, maybe I should cut back a little bit here. But one of the times when the band was on tour, and in high schools, and you're setting up on stages and you don't know what's going on, I turned around to say something to one of the other percussionists, and he disappeared, and his chair had fallen off the back of the stage, and he just went whoop, backwards. And from then on, we always checked the back end of the stage to figure out what was going on. I used to play all the operas in the summer. University of Iowa had a very strong opera program, and I was in the pit orchestra. And Madame Butterfly was one of our challenges, and this was early to mid 50s. People have to remember, and percussion is developing.
Right.
So all the wonderful modern kinds of things you have, but there's a place in Madame Butterfly where you have this beautiful bird warbling, and the only way they'd come up to do a bird warble was that you fill water in this little thing and you blow into it, and it makes a warble like a bird. The problem is somebody kicked the bird over because it's dark and nobody knew, so I pick up the bird to do the warble, and it sounds like I'm strangling the family parakeet. And fortunately, it was during a dress rehearsal, and the conductor fortunately had a sense of humor, but we learned to do a better job and not strangle the parakeet during Madame Butterfly. That was not appropriate. So those are some of the adventures that you have when you get to play.
Wow, that's awesome! What a great background. So where did you meet your husband?
So that was fun. I met my husband. I was working in a restaurant. And the manager of the restaurant was a pretty grouchy lady. I enjoyed working there, but I would leave that restaurant and walk down the street to another restaurant to eat my lunch. I could have eaten there, but she was cranky enough that I didn't want to stay around. So I walked down the street, and here's my husband doing the same thing at that restaurant that I was, and we just started visiting, and that was how we met. So he was supposed to be a lawyer. His father was an attorney, his mother was an attorney, and he was going to join the family business. But he found he did not like law school one bit. He majored in political science, went to law school, and I remember him saying, you know what, I hate this. And so we said, then do something else. And he did. He found other jobs that he could do really well. He sold. He was a salesman for creative printing, and in order to learn how to sell the product to his customers, they sent him for a week to Nashville, and they had a place called Printers Row or Printers Alley, and he went through the whole training program to learn to run the different printing presses so that he could explain to clients what we can do with various kinds of things, and he learned all about paper and that kind of thing, and did sales for quite a while, and then for some reason or other, he was recommended for a job with the Episcopal bishop as an administrator. He'd done his military work, and he was a clerk typist and did administrative work during the army, and discovered that he really had very good administrative work. So he was hired, so off we moved to Des Moines, and I had just started going back to school to finish my degree. With 3 children, I always seem to figure out how to do things the hard way. So I had 3 children trying to go to school, and we moved, and I ended up in Des Moines, and I thought, oh, this will be fun. I'll take at least a semester off and unpack and do all of those kinds of things. And unbeknownst to me, my husband went right down to Drake University, signed me up. For 4 weeks later, I was back in the classroom again, saying, I haven't even unpacked. And so I went back to school at Drake University, They did not have a strong percussion program, so I switched to voice and piano. And I had so many performance hours. They did not have a really good symphony. So I joined the Des Moines Symphony and played with the Des Moines Symphony. When we were in Cedar Rapids, I had the first percussion studio. I worked for a music store. And I had one half of the living room was a percussion studio. So I had 2 timpani, a marimba, a trap set, and all other various things. And I ended up with about 30 students. And when I first announced to their parents that they were doing a percussion recital, everybody said, "A what?" And so we had articles in the newspaper, and we did our first percussion recital in a church basement, of course. So I had a lot of fun doing that, and then had to finish up my degree, and then started teaching, and that was another whole set of adventures when I started teaching.
So where did you teach?
So I taught in the Des Moines schools, and I first thought that I would do elementary, you know, all of the elementary songs and finger plays and, you know, all of that kind of thing. But in music, you get a K through 12 certificate, so you have to have student teaching on 2 different levels. So I did elementary school, and then I did middle school because I knew I didn't want to do high school. So I ended up in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade middle school experience and discovered that these kids were absolutely crazy, and I loved them. And a position opened up, and I was willing to teach in poverty area schools, target schools with high levels of minority population. And I figured that would be a challenge to learn. What they were teaching in school was kind of a disconnect from university, everything I had as a classical musician, to what do you do with a bunch of kids in an inner city situation. So I would have adventures like every music classroom had a wonderful console unit with record players because you use records all the time then. Got to remember, this is 1970 now. And so one day I show up, and of course your lessons are done all around music. You can't just talk about music, you have to hear it. So I walk into music one morning and I think, something's wrong with the room. What's wrong? Oh, my large console record player is missing. It's been stolen during the night. So quick, we get another record player, and a couple of weeks later, I walk into the room, and here it is back again, but it's full of 45s that whoever had taken it had all of their records in there. And I was introduced to crossover music that I really hadn't heard before, and artists that I hadn't heard before. So I had a great deal of fun going through all of those records. And that was where I had to learn, how do you put together a concert with a bunch of kids that don't know the kind of music I've been trained to do? So with the help of the community, we would put that together. And we had a custodian who sang absolutely beautifully. So we would use him, and we would use him as a soloist, and then get the kids to go in. And then I had to find an accompanist, and I found a woman who played gospel music by ear, and she would come into the classroom and teach us. And I was really interested in blues, but the custodian said, "Oh, no, we can't sing blues. It can only be holy blues." So then I had to learn the difference between the 2 kinds of blues. So that really launched me on trying to learn a whole different kind of music than I'd ever been exposed to before. And the kids were just lots and lots of fun. I really enjoyed them. And I moved from that first school to another one, which was really much different. And I could do more things. I could do excerpts from musicals. So one year we did excerpts from Brigadoon. And we, through the Scottish Heritage Society, we got kilts for all the young men in a small group. And we had one very good looking and very confident young man who wore his kilt to the lunchroom. And you should have seen the way the lunchroom reacted. All of the girls just, with these kilts on. It was just absolutely great. And I had between 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, I had over 100 kids in the different choruses, and I always rehearsed them separately. So nobody knew what was coming.
Right.
So the 6th graders only knew what they were doing. 7th graders only knew. 8th graders knew. And I pulled people apart and put a lot of individual groups together. And so one of the things I did was I was playing with a pipe band at the time.
Wow.
I was the drummer with a pipe band. And I arranged for the pipe band to come. So we hit a certain part into the musical. The kids had been doing Down on McConaughey Square. And all of a sudden we opened the doors to the back of the auditorium and I had my drum hidden and I had the other drummer and we went out on the fronts and we started the beginning beat for the drums and the pipe band comes down the aisle and you should have seen the audience just absolutely, they never seen, and of course the kids didn't know what to expect either. So that was one of my fun things. And as part of that and as part of my husband's job, I was able to go to Scotland and studied Highland drumming in Edinburgh.
Peggy, that is such a nice picture that you just showed me. You and your husband is in the kilts. Tell me more about it.
Okay, this is when we were members of the Scottish Heritage Society in Des Moines.
Oh, okay.
And we would, in January, we'd always have a Robbie Burns dinner, and at other times we would have other celebrations. And so my husband got full Scottish dress, and this is the formal dress that he would wear. You notice that I'm not in a kilt, I'm in a long kilt skirt. Because the kilt, and I've actually got my kilt over there that I can show you.
Oh, I would love to see it.
The kilt is menswear. It is not for women.
Right.
Women wear it if you're either Highland dancing or if you're in a pipe band.
Oh.
His ancestry is Scottish, mine is Scottish. And so that led us to my husband was able to get an opportunity to go to Scotland as part of a partner in mission program through the Episcopal Church. And we spent about 6 weeks in Scotland.
Wow.
And he had arranged for me to study with the drum sergeant of the Edinburgh Police Band, who was retired. But it was an amazing thing. But oftentimes when you belong to a church, the church has connections, and he told them what he would like to do because he knew he would be traveling and I would be by myself in Edinburgh.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time with this man, Jimmy Catherwood, and we would walk just about everywhere. Buses were really good, but you walked everywhere. So. And Edinburgh is a very hilly town, so I read somewhere that it's got the best developed thighs in the world from all of that walking. So I had a number of adventures with Jimmy, and he was an excellent teacher. But we'd be walking the street, and whenever he'd run into any of the policemen, he'd stop them and he'd introduce me and say, "This woman came all the way from America to study with me." So I think I met half the police force of Edinburgh that way. And they talked about Bullen the Barrel, and I meant to look that up. But what I remember is that if you were assigned to working the docks at Edinburgh, you could tap into the whiskey kegs and get yourself a wee dram when you're on duty late at night. So that was called Bullen the Barrel.
Wow.
So I've got a few other pictures, and I can tell you a couple of the other adventures that I had while I was in Edinburgh.
Awesome.
The pictures of the two drum majors was taken at Bathgate. There was you always have Highland games and competitions, really big on competitions. So my teacher told me to go to Bathgate, so I hopped the bus and found my way to Bathgate and met him there. And he started taking me around and introducing me to these drum majors with these pipe bands that I'd done nothing but listen to their records and heard about. So I was pretty much in awe of doing that. And the following Christmas, my husband gave me 2 autographed pictures of those 2 men. And somehow or other he'd sent the pictures back to Scotland. They'd autographed them and sent them back, and that was all through help from the church. So it's amazing sometimes connections. The third one, the picture of me and the wee drummer. His name is Wee Tom.
Yeah, let's turn the picture around. I know we
got this one.
We did show this, but let's tell our audience you're talking about this picture now. Okay.
So we're talking about this one, and the man I'm standing with is, I never did get a last name on him, but my teacher called him Wee Tom, and they were great friends, and he was in a colliery band, which means one of the mines. So lots, and the police have a lot, then you've got the civilian bands, and then you've got colliery bands. So Wee Tom came for a visit because, again, they have all of these competitions, and my teacher was teaching at what was called a kilted school, which meant that all the young men would wear kilts, and training them on the pipes and the drums. And they had a big event of competition, and it was held at the castle where the tattoo is. And so again, I made my way up to the castle and introduced myself to people, and was seated in the second row of the reviewing stand. And all these young men in their pipe bands came out the entrance of the castle, just similar to the tattoo. And they were so proud, and they were so excited about what they were doing. And it was the kilted schools from all around that area. So there were probably 8 to 10 young men in their bands. Practically no women at that time. They were beginning to train the women, but that was pretty unusual. And after it was over, then they had a reception. And so we went to the reception. It was put on by the military. So we went to like an officers club. I had no idea where I was going. Wee Tom and Jimmy, my teacher, took me there. And that was where I learned about Boilermakers. I had never heard of a Boilermaker before. And Jimmy and Wee Tom were drinking Boilermakers. And they did not have one, and they did not have two. They had several. And I finally realized that it was midnight, and the last bus left about 12:30.
Wow.
And they were feeling no pain, as the expression goes. And so they were supposed to be taking care of me, and I ended up taking care of them, getting them to the bus stop and getting onto the bus and telling the bus driver where we went. And I was trying to get them to go home, and they insisted that they had to go back to the bed and breakfast with me. And the bus driver said, "No worry, I'll take them back." So they dropped me off, and then the bus driver took them back. And this was 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning by the time we got done with that. But that was my education of learning about Boilermakers and spending the evening with Jimmy and Wee Tom.
That is such a cool story.
So this first picture is from 1981.
These are the pictures which they just saw, okay, and they're here, okay.
So this first picture is in 1981, the Episcopal Bishop of Iowa invited the Archbishop of Canterbury, who at that time was Robert Brunsey, to come to Iowa, and it worked out. And his representative for all of his travel was a man by the name of Terry Waite, and that's the bearded man that's sitting over there on the side. And Terry Waite is very well known because he served as a hostage negotiator for the Anglican Church, and he was taken prisoner in Beirut for a number of years. Let's see, how long? From 1987 to 1991, he was held prisoner by Hezbollah. And when he was released, then he ended up resigning his position with the Archbishop and went ahead and continued work with a humanitarian work. But he was the advanced person and came to Iowa, and with my husband's job on the diocesan level, my husband worked with him, and so we actually have a letter from Terry Waite's wife. My husband had written to her during the time that he was in captive, expressing concerns from the diocese. And so that was a very interesting thing. Terry Waite is still alive, and he lives in New Zealand, and he is still writing books. The second picture showing the pipe band. Of course, because I'm a drummer, I'm in the very back, but the pipe band played at the Archbishop's celebration, and we were part of the pipe band. And so we were all waiting behind stage and visiting with the Archbishop, who was very easy to visit with. And he told a funny story about shortly after he was ordained, his wife was a concert pianist, and she had to find a dress for one of her concerts. And so he referred to the clerk as the shop girl, was helping her find a dress. And, well, now what color do you think would work well? And she said, well, my husband wears a lot of purple, so it should be something that goes with that. And the shop girl says, oh, how trendy. So we thought that was a delightful story for the Archbishop to be telling. So that was a very big thing, and the gift that the Diocese of Iowa gave. Iowa raises a lot of hogs or pigs, and so does the Archbishop. And so we gave the Archbishop a baby pig, which was supposed to be a food chain. The problem was, with all of the laws on quarantine and everything, the poor pig got too big and too old by the time we got through it. So somehow or other they substituted a second pig, and we finally did get a pig over there to help with the food chain with the Archbishop's hogs. So do you want to see the kilt?
Absolutely. So. Come on this side. Wow.
So this is my kilt. Again, remembering that it's menswear, and it is not a costume.
Right.
Prince Charles got into a great deal of difficulty because he wore Highland dress to a Halloween party.
Wow.
And he was severely criticized for this extreme faux pas. So here's the back side. These are the buckles. Go with it, and then here are all of the pleats, so that as a Highland dancer, when you're moving, the kilt moves absolutely beautiful with it. And then the front part is absolutely plain, and you have a kilt pin that holds down the flap, because this is all you have here. And of course, one of the jokes on the kilt is what's worn under the kilt. And I have an absolutely wonderful picture of one of the Highland regiments shipping out during World War II, and a breeze catches his kilt, and it proves what is worn under the kilt, and that would be not much, at least with this young man. This is the plaid, and the plaid goes around your waist, and then over your shoulder, here, and then then you have this lovely wide belt that you wear.
Wow.
And then this is your sporran. In the American West, you would call it your possibles bag, because you could carry whatever you needed with that. And then,
let me see it closely. Yeah.
And then, not as part of Highland dress, but one of our adventures when we were in Scotland, we made 3 trips to Scotland. So on the second trip, my husband decided that he really needed a crummock.
Wow.
And so I had to call around and try and find where we could get a crummock. And that left us driving all over Scotland trying to find a crummock. And we finally went to the tourist center, which we had tried to stay away from, and saw a notice saying that I make crummocks. And, so we got together with it, and he was a policeman. And my husband picked out this crummock. And so the policeman said, now, you know how you use this, don't you? You do this way, you stick it in, and you just have a wee blather. That's all you use it for. So we had quite fun. We had quite fun acquiring all of these things. And all of my husband's Scottish gear, apparel, was made in Edinburgh. And we went to a kilt shop on George IV Bridges, which is right next to Greyfriars Bobby statue. Which was a great place to visit. And I used to walk from there to a back way to go to the castle, but it was through a cemetery.
Wow.
And one of the times that I was going through there, I thought I'd made a mistake because it was really so foggy. I got a little bit scared going through the cemetery and all of this fog. And Edinburgh is a wonderful place for telling ghost stories. Let me tell you, they take ghost tours.
Wow.
So my imagination was pretty active at that time.
Peggy, I know you shared so many interesting things with me, and I'm just thinking, a couple of years ago when we had our university day, and you had done an amazing presentation on Sudan, and I know how much the other residents enjoyed it. I was present, and I know how passionate you were about the presentation about Sudan. Can you please share something more?
Well, that's another phase of my working career. I taught school for probably 15 years. Then I was a legal assistant in municipal finance. And then I kept trying to retire. And I think I tried to retire twice. And somehow or other, I got involved in refugee resettlement and through my church.
Right.
And we started volunteering for Lutheran services. And I was hired to finish a 3-year grant for a resettlement program for 40, we called them young men, but they had to be 18 or over. So there were 2 programs for this group called Lost Boys from Sudan. There were also Lost Girls. There was a very severe civil war going on in Sudan in the 90s and even prior to that time. But it really kind of came to a head in terms of the violence and the destruction in the 90s. And the group of children were identified to be resettled in the United States. So about 3,000 of these young people were resettled. So I was asked to take over this program and finish it for these young men. This group had to be 18 or older. There was also a program for unaccompanied minors, and they were under the age of 18. They lived with foster families and were able to go to high school. They had a much better footing to get themselves established. The young men that I had came over, and under the refugee resettlement program, they have 90 days in which to find a job. They all had learned English and were going to school in some way. So they right away had to try and find jobs. And it was my job to do various cultural presentations to them to try and help them understand our culture, help them with their jobs. And at first that was a struggle for them. They did not get along well with Bosnian women because Bosnian women were very strong, and theirs is a very paternal culture, and they're not used to being told by women what to do. So we had learning curves for those young men. I had a lot of adventures, taking them all kinds of places. One young man was very, very insightful, and one day when we were in the car and I was taking them someplace, he looked at me and he said, "You know, women in Sudan do not live long enough to have hair the color of yours."
Wow.
Which was kind of a stunning piece for me to think about that. The second thing that he said, "I have noticed that you have machines to do a lot of your heavy work for you," which was another very insightful thing when I just think about vacuum cleaners and everything else that we have. He was coming from a world in which that didn't happen. And I asked him if he knew how old he was, because almost all of these young men came in with a birth date of January 1, because nobody really knew when they were born. They had approximate idea of ages, but they didn't know, so they were all assigned January 1 by the resettlement agencies. But he said that his mother took a piece of grass every year and put it in a bowl or a pot, and so there was one grass for each year. He remembered that. He also remembered that when the Nile flooded, he would sit in the mud and catch fish in the mud and throw it to a little younger brother or sister. That would be one thing that they would do. The young Sudanese men, particularly the Dinka, had cattle camps, and at the cattle camps they were branded with a tribal mark. None of these young men had them. That showed how disrupted their childhood was, because they didn't have that experience, because of the war had disrupted everything, and they had fled to Ethiopia, and then they make this incredible journey to Kenya, to the Kakuma refugee camp. So with the work that I was doing with them, and we were resettling a lot of Sudanese refugees at that time. I decided that I really needed to go to Sudan and try and figure out what it was all about. Now that was really a pipe dream. So I just started asking around through the church to see if I could find a way to go, and I finally did, and was able to make 2 trips to Sudan. The first time I went, they were under a temporary ceasefire. And we were told that the plane could only stay on the ground for 30 minutes, so we all had to help unload the plane and get out of there so that the plane could take off again. We stayed in thatched roof huts. There was no electricity, no running water. There were slit latrines. And as we traveled from village to village, we voted on the latrines as to which had the best one, because they were all done differently. It was amazing. It was amazing where they would find a place to put toilet paper, for example. And the heat was really pretty extensive, and you had to be very careful about the water. I don't like eggs. And so one of the villages we went to, we were given hard-boiled eggs to eat, and I didn't eat them, and half the group got sick because they'd been washed. They had peeled them and washed them in water that hadn't been purified. So I was lucky with that I didn't do that. We had an adventure with a snake in the hut. I had a roommate, and we slept under malaria nets. And I always we wore hiking boots rather than sandals, because there are a lot of snakes in Sudan and scorpions. So every night when I get ready for bed, I take my boots off and put them in a Ziploc plastic bag and put them on the end of my bed underneath a malaria net. And you go to sleep at night hearing squitch, squitch, squitch in the ceiling. And it was just the bugs eating the thatch. Every 3 years, you have to replace the thatch roof because the termites and other critters manage to eat their way through. So one morning, I'm waking up, and all of a sudden, my roommate screams and runs out of the hut. And I said, "What's the problem?" And she's outside, and she said, "Snake." And I immediately am on my bed and saying, "Where?" And I finally see it over in the corner, curled up. And
it was in your room where you were?
It was in our tukul, yeah. There are windows, but there's nothing on the windows. So spiders and lizards.
There are windows, but there's nothing
windows
in
with
there.
No screens. And if you shut them, it's like being in a sauna and you're going to die. So they were open. So I assumed that either the snake came in through the door or over the windowsill. I don't know. So one of the young men came in and said, "Oh, I'll take care of it." And one of the young women stuck her head in the door and she said, "Bad snake, very bad snake." And I'm just sitting on the bed with my feet up onto the bed and waiting for him to come and get the snake and dispatch the snake. And
were you very scared at that minute?
Not really. It was across the room from me. If it had been much closer, that I would have done that. We always kept our bags packed. We had to go so that if anything happened, I could just grab everything and go. That was the first trip. The second trip, they had done a comprehensive peace agreement, and it was much different. And we went to the marketplace where I bought material for my dresses, and I've got one of those on now. And it was like money changers at the temple. We were exchanging dollars for Sudanese dollars with the money changer in the marketplace. But the marketplace had holes in the ground, which were bomb shelters. And the year before we arrived, the hospital had been bombed multiple times. So this was a vulnerable place, and the war was very real to them. So one of the things that happened to me when I was there, it was very, very hot. You're not used to eating the food. They have a bread called kisra, and it's made with a grain that we're not used to eating. And all of a sudden, due to the heat and the food, my body just shut down and I couldn't eat.
Wow.
I could drink, and we had been told to bring dried fruits and things like that. And it was about 3 days before I could get my stomach back and get myself back into order. So when I returned, they immediately wanted to know how it was, and I told them that story, and they said, "Now you know how we feel."
Wow.
And again, there was that connection. I had been to their country, to their land. I'd eaten their food.
True.
I was in a strange place. My stomach rejected it, just like what happened to them when they came to the United States. Their stomach rejected food, and they had difficulty. So that was very much of a bonding situation for us. As part of that work with the Sudanese people, I decided that I really needed to learn another language because we were working with people who were struggling to learn languages, although they spoke multiple languages. So I went to the Sudanese community. They'd asked me to come and sit in on a class and help them with English. And so I just said to the class one day, I need to learn another language. Should I learn Kiswahili? Should I learn Dinka? Should I learn Arabic? Which would be the best language for me to learn? So the classroom erupted in this wonderful melange of languages, all talking, and the class is all men. And then finally they stopped talking, and the teacher said, "We have decided." I thought that was very interesting. "We have decided that you should learn Arabic."
Wow.
That would be the most universal language for you to learn. So then I started studying Arabic. If I could find teachers there, and it was in a class. And then a friend of mine was also studying Arabic, and she found an Arab academy in Cairo. And she said, "Let's go."
Wow.
And
look at you.
so I was amazed. My husband was open to this, and so I took off for a month and did an intensive language study in Cairo, and I did that twice. So I was able to do 2 months of intensive Arabic language, and really had lots of fun. I had the most delightful young teachers.
Wow.
They weren't sure what to do with me as an older student, but they were writing excellent curriculum. And so we had to shop at the little local stores, and we had to wander around the streets, and we had to find internet cafes to do internet. And we stayed as far away from anything American hotels as we could, so we were staying on the local economy.
Wow.
And it was a case in which you never look at anything differently. Water is a finite source. So having safe drinking water is a really important thing. Washing your food, keeping your hands clean, no air conditioning to speak of, and eating food that's very different from what you're used to.
So how did you feel after you took this intensive course for a couple of months? How did you feel at the end of the 2 months?
It was very hard, and one of my reasons for doing it is I was older. I was in my 60s by the time I'm doing this. I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So I was in my 60s at the time I was doing this. I did it because we were resettling a number of older women, and the integration was very hard for them. So I thought if I put myself in a different culture and understood what it was like in the reverse, that I could better understand my clients. So it really was a case of now you know how we feel type of thing, that you do not see the world in the same way. But if I can learn to do this, or I can try to do this, and maybe I can encourage my clients to do it also, and to learn how to do it, because they have to jump on buses and go places and can't speak the language. We put them on bikes and have them ride places where they just don't know where they're going. And I had the same experiences, so I could relate much more to that. So I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Peggy, I see some real interesting artifacts around. Something you would like to share and show them to me?
Let me show you a few things.
Okay.
So this is a dish that came from the Maasai market in Nairobi. It was a gift from the Sudanese community, and
Wow.
that shows you the kind of hut that we would live
Oh
in.
my!
But it
Okay.
wasn't. But it wasn't on. It wasn't on a lake. But the Dinka spent a lot of time in the water, and when I did a reunion with them in Washington D.C., they went to a camp and they had canoeing for them, and they forbade them to go into the lake to swim because they were little parasites or something. So the first thing these young men did, dive out of the canoes and start swimming.
Wow.
It's a little hard to take young men who a few of them had served as boy soldiers. It's a little bit hard to tell them what to do.
Right.
They come from a totally different background. So here's a couple of other pieces.
Okay. Okay.
These bookends are from a school in Cairo called the Deaf School.
Oh.
And it's run by the Episcopal Church, and all of their students are deaf.
Wow.
And my friend and I went there to visit, and I bought these because I just love the camels.
Right.
In Arabic, it is Jamel,
Oh.
or
let's
Gamel
just
if you're
take a
using an Arabic
close
pronunciation.
look. Wow.
Or in one of the Sudanese tribal languages, it is Ibl. I always thought that was a delightful name for a camel, is Ibl.
Able.
So
Okay.
here's a couple of other things. So this wall hanging we got when we were in Ecuador. My husband was Secretary Treasurer of a standing committee on world missions.
Oh.
And we spent a couple of weeks in Ecuador, and we bought that.
It's beautiful.
Isn't that gorgeous?
It really is.
I just love it. And this basket, the women made in the village where we were, in Sudan.
Wow.
And this is really my prized possession. This is a gift
Oh.
from a Sudanese community called Darfur, and they are in the northwest corner of Sudan, and they are an African tribe. And notice that you're in a desert country and all of the seashells, because at one time there was a sea. And this is a traditional women's basket where you can store things.
Wow.
And it would be put in a rope. They would have a rope around it, and it would go up to the top of the hut or the tukul, and they could pull it up. And this was the woman's. This is the woman's possibles bag. This is where she would store her most precious possessions.
Wow.
So one of the group of people that I'd helped resettle went back to Darfur and found this and brought it back and gave it to me as a gift from the community.
Wow.
And it really,
beautiful.
that has made it very special. It wasn't easy to bring back. And then the last thing is more baskets here. This is, again, the women in the village where we were wove all of these baskets. So I was there in 2003 and 2005, and these baskets have held up all
Wow.
that time.
Beautiful.
So they're just beautiful, and I
Right.
love them.
Great.
So I think that's all my show and tell.
And you like your little plants? Yeah, I
Here are
can
my
see
plants.
this. And here,
Taking
that's
over.
good. That's good. You got a nice view too.
It's a gorgeous view.
Yeah,
It's really beautiful.
nice.
So, yeah, contrary to what I'm supposed to do, I spend all my time out here.
Beautiful.
That was made for my husband. It was a gift. He worked at hospice, and so one of the women there made that for him.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that gorgeous? And the piece from Sedona.
Yeah, that's the Last Supper, right?
Last Supper.
That's beautiful. So this piece you purchased it?
Yeah, we purchased that.
Okay, very nice.
Okay, so this is my unmanageable. Doesn't have anything to do with Sudan
Right.
or Cairo. It has to do with my family history.
Oh, okay.
My great-great-grandfather was private secretary to President Benjamin Harrison.
Wow.
And Benjamin Harrison's one-year term was not the most stellar, I understand. And the family story is that my great-grandfather burned his private diary when he was done with that service.
Wow.
But this whole silver service was given as a gift to him.
Let's take a closer look first.
From the newspaper. And I don't know if you can see this, but it's dated November 15, 1873.
Wow, yeah.
And so I'm trying to figure out how to donate this to the Benjamin Harrison Library.
Oh, wow.
And you can see nobody polishes silver anymore, so
Right.
I've got to polish all this silver. I decided to weigh the tray. The tray weighs 9.8 pounds. And I'm going to have to try and ship that, and I don't know quite
So
how I'm
how
going
do
to do it.
you've not polished it? Yeah.
Yeah, and then my mother got him to write a 40-page memoir
Wow.
with his original signature. So the library said that they would like to do it, and it's a lot of politics, and as well as his military career. But the one thing that I thought was most interesting about it was that they took a train trip out west with a bunch of political folks, and they got someplace into Nebraska territory, and they were concerned about the hostiles.
Right.
And so they had some soldiers get on aboard the train to provide some protection, and the soldiers were led by General George Armstrong Custer.
Right. Wow.
And I thought, and so it was several years before the Battle of the Little Bighorn that they had that experience. But that was something that I really didn't. It was 1885, it says, that they had done that. So that's an interesting piece of family history
That is
that I didn't know about. But I've got to work on my unmanageable.
My God, that is great.
So we can end with my unmanageable. If anybody wants to polish silver. Yes, I've got the silver polishes,
Right.
and I think I'll do these pieces, and then I'm not going to touch the
I
tray.
think so.
Because the tray has the inscription.
I agree.
And I'm going
It's
to let
best
the library.
not to also.
I'm going to let the library take
Right.
care
I
of
don't think you should polish anything. This is like this really is quite a piece
it.
here.
It's quite amazing. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Peggy, this has just been an amazing hour I spent with you. When I came here, I know I wanted to talk to you about the chorus, but I did not know I'm going to hear all these cool stories. Wow.
We all have stories to tell.
These were the most amazing stories I have heard. And, just you're just an amazing lady. You do such a great job right from the time that you have moved here to Southport Square. I mean, all the things that you do, and just to have those kind of intellectual discussions that
Those are fun, and the movie discussions that we have had, and the song catcher, people really enjoy doing that.
And I can see your background, your stories, just your life.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing it with me today, and I'm positive all your fellow residents are really going to enjoy it too.
Well, thank you.
So thank you for your time, and thank you for all your valuable contributions to our community.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity.
And we were all going to look forward to the next concert. All right. Thank you again.